This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During Cybersecurity Awareness Month, LifeLock wants to give you helpful tips to protect your identity. Using multi-factor authentication can be a line of defense to help protect your personal information, like getting a text with a security code. But LifeLock offers comprehensive protection against identity theft. Protect your identity today with a 30-day free trial at lifelock.com/podcast.
Today on CityCast Philly, there's just about 600 hours until Election Day. Besides the presidential contest, the senatorial race in our state could determine which party controls Congress. Is the Democratic incumbent really letting fentanyl in over the border? And does the Republican challenger really live in Connecticut? It's the Friday News Roundup, all about the U.S. Senate race here in the Commonwealth. It's Friday, October 11th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. We're joined today by two reporters in Pennsylvania who are closely following the Senate race between Senator Bob Casey, the Democrat, and businessman Dave McCormick, the Republican. Katie Meyer is a government editor and reporter at Spotlight, PA. Hey, Katie, welcome back to the show.
Good to be here.
And Charles McElwee is the editor of Real Clear Pennsylvania, and he also writes for Political Magazine. Hey, Charles, welcome to CityCast Philly.
Great to be here. Thank you.
All right, let's talk the Pennsylvania Senate race. Charles, let's start with you. What are the stakes here? Is control of the whole U.S. Senate at play?
Yes, when you look at the composition of the map, this race is critical for Republicans to win when it comes to control of the Senate. And it's a fascinating race to follow because it's also a test of the realignment that has unfolded in the state since Bob Casey was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006. At that time, the Democratic Party was dramatically different here in Pennsylvania, and it has since transitioned, just as the Republican Party has too, in the Trump era. And this race between Dave McCormick and Bob Casey will really be a test of the margins fight between will Casey have just enough voters among the working class, the former base of the party that Lon defined his family's presence in the party? Will he have just enough of those voters to win again? And can McCormick tap into enough suburban voters, the former base of the GOP in the state, to pull an upset and defeat Casey?
Katie, what's the state of the race? Who's up? Who's down?
Well, first of all, I should say, the Senate's extremely tight right now, as Charles said. So Pennsylvania is one of a number of races that could be a real factor. So like, for instance, Montana looks like a real possibility for Democrats to lose a seat. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania is one of the ones where people are watching, and we're also seeing a ton of money coming in. So with that all said, right now, it is pretty tight. It's tighter than Bob Casey's previous re-election races have been. He still seems to be in the lead, and it's, I think, a testament to the fact that Casey has been in Pennsylvania politics for an extremely long time, and that before he was in politics, his dad was a two-term governor of Pennsylvania. So the Casey name still does carry a lot of sway, but like Charles said, the type of Democrat that Bob Casey has always been isn't really a Democrat who exists in Pennsylvania anymore. That sort of blue dog Democrat who's a little bit more conservative on social issues, more of a union person. And Casey has changed with the times. His politics have really shifted over the years, but it is a fascinating, as Charles said, realignment in what a Democrat is and can be in Pennsylvania to win races. And again, as I said, he is still leading McCormick, it appears, but the race is tight.
We'll talk about that in a little second, about how he's changed over the years. Katie, is there one specific issue that defines this race?
It's a great question. Democrats have really sought to make many of their statewide races and national races about abortion. That's been an extremely motivating issue for Democratic voters. It's complicated in this race. Casey used to be against abortion or against expanding abortion access, where McCormick has kind of said, he's taken the slightly more moderate Republican stance where he wants it to be, a state issue. But yeah, the economy is another big one. And I should say, too, immigration and the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. has been a real sort of repeated talking point for both candidates, as well as their relationships to China. So those would be the big ones.
Okay, speaking of China, I watched the debate that Casey and McCormick did last week. China came up. Casey says McCormick invested in China as the CEO of a hedge fund instead of supporting America. Here's a clip from that debate.
As a hedge fund manager, he was managing money for President Xi of China, investing in China, increasing those investments by 108,000%, lifting up our adversaries instead of supporting America.
Well, let's turn to your
Casey's trying to position himself as a hawk on China. And going back to 2012, he has had statements where he is tough on China comparative to even elected officials at that time. Casey is hitting him hard because this is a state that was eviscerated by declining manufacturing really since 1999-2000 with the opening to China. And then before that, of course, NAFTA, which was passed in 1993. So we're looking between 1993 and now, tens of thousands, countless jobs lost in Pennsylvania, including in northeastern Pennsylvania, Casey's former electoral base, where people are disillusioned over the legacy of China. That, more than anything in this race, that seems to be Casey's go-to when it comes to courting just enough working class voters, his former base, to somehow survive this race, which, again, he's the incumbent. Pennsylvania has a long history of rewarding incumbents, and this is the issue that he has hit McCormick on the hardest.
I'll just emphasize what Charles said. I mean, McCormick, I think, does have a tough sell to some voters just because he was the CEO of not just a hedge fund, but the world's largest hedge fund.
Right.
So as, a person in that position, yeah, he had close relationships with foreign countries. He did invest in China. He's been on tape in the past sort of, emphasizing how important the U.S.-China relationship is. And he has really, really sought to position that not as a bad thing, but as a good thing, saying, I will be tough on China. I have experience in this area. I'm a person who knows how to deal with foreign governments. And again, like Charles said, Casey has absolutely positioned himself as tough on China. And also as somebody who is really committed to American manufacturing. I think that's another part of the relationship that's important. He's kind of mentioned, especially in ads, efforts to keep steel production in the U.S., to produce microchips domestically and not in China. He's been against, consumer price gouging. So those issues where we sort of, marry the two sort of top of mind American voter issues of the economy and the U.S. relationship with China, that's been something Casey's really tried to emphasize.
Let's talk about those commercials you just mentioned. I keep seeing commercials about McCormick living outside of Pennsylvania. We just dealt with this last time, around 2 years ago, when Republican Senate nominee Mehmet Oz was allegedly living in New Jersey. Oz actually beat McCormick in the GOP primary then. Casey kept bringing up the allegations that McCormick lives in Connecticut. Here's a clip from the debate.
Probably the biggest lie told in this whole election, that probably most Pennsylvanians have never heard a bigger lie, was the lie when my opponent said he lived in Pennsylvania when he was living in Connecticut. The Associated Press on August the 14th, 2023, did a story that proved that he was living in Connecticut after telling people all throughout 2022, all throughout 2022 and 23, that he lived in Pennsylvania. He lied about that.
I have a follow-up for you.
I mean, those jabs, they hurt. What's the deal here? Is there accuracy to Casey's claims? Because how can you be living in Connecticut and run for Senate here in Pennsylvania? And why does this keep happening with candidates who supposedly live out of town?
There's interesting history to this accusation. What's funny is Dave McCormick does have deep Pennsylvania roots, and it's funny. I mean, even he has such a Pennsylvania name. It sounds like the name of like a township supervisor in the state. But the point is, this is a state that has long rewarded statewide elected officials who don't have roots in the state, whether that's Arlen Specter, who grew up in Kansas, Pat Toomey, who grew up in Rhode Island, and even John Hines, who to this day remains arguably the most popular senator in modern Pennsylvania history. Although he's from the storied Hines family, he grew up in San Francisco. McCormick, though, did grow up in Pennsylvania, spent much of his life here, and really his career in terms of its ascendance was launched in Pittsburgh. So I don't know if, considering how robustly McCormick has campaigned throughout the state this cycle, I don't know if that accusation will hit as hard or prove as effective as it was when Fetterman did the same against Dr. Mehmet Oz in 2022.
He still rents a $16 million mansion in Connecticut, right, Katie?
He does, yeah. So that's the thing. I mean, I do think it's a factor for voters. It was a factor in the primary the last time McCormick ran for office. Oz hit him on not living in Pennsylvania, and he hit Oz on not living in Pennsylvania. But anyway, yes. So McCormick does, he bought a home in Pittsburgh in 2021. He still rents, as you said, a $16 million mansion in Connecticut. He lived in Connecticut in the run-up to his first bid for U.S. Senate. And yes, he does have roots in Pennsylvania. His dad was the president of Bloomsburg University when he was growing up. He was also the first chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. So there's absolutely a history there. But in recent years, he's lived in Connecticut.
I mean, rent does get pricey and it has gone up. But in this case, I mean, how much is rent for a $16 million house?
It is interesting. I don't even know how the idea of renting something that expensive is nuts to me. But I'm just, I have a different life from David McCormick.
But look, I mean, I think Pennsylvanians have long granted the absolution on that front, too. I mean, Heinz, his pastime was collecting 13th century Flemish art. Right? So, but he still was beloved among working class voters in the state. So I do think, it remains to be seen. This race will be a test of it, but Pennsylvanians have traditionally granted absolution to the wealth of a candidate.
Wealth, and as you said, the Senate has sort of a long history of people moving into a state and then running for U.S. Senate. I mean, let us not forget, Hillary Clinton was the U.S. Senator for New York.
Exactly.
So people move around. It's not necessarily a deal-making thing for this race, but it's a factor.
More on the election after the break. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. October is the season for wearing masks and costumes, but some of us feel like we wear a mask and hide more often than we want to. At work, in social settings, around family, therapy can help you learn to accept all parts of yourself. Therapy has been helpful for me to learn positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/CityCast today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/CityCast.
Hi, this is David Plotz of CityCast. Have you thought about a gift for yourself this year? One that has the power to help you grow and learn and become a better version of yourself? Give yourself the gift of language by getting Babbel. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by language experts, Babbel gets you talking a new language in 3 weeks, because talking is the key to really knowing a language. And that's how Babbel approaches it. It's designed for real conversation. So I have a trip to France planned with my girlfriend. Was it inspired by the Olympics? Yes, it was. And it's given me the chance to revive my old high school French. And it's so fun to catch back up with the vocabulary I'd forgotten. To remember all the food, for example. I'm in a lesson on ingredients, so I'm going to make crepes with butter and sugar. Avec sucre et de beurre salé, on va se régaler. We're going to have a feast. I learned this great new French expression too. J'en ai l'eau à la bouche. That means I have water in the mouth. That means it's mouth-watering. Love it. Love French. Anyway, Babbel gets you talking, and studies from Yale and Michigan State University and other leading universities prove that it works. So here is a special holiday deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast, spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Katie, you've covered Philly. Are these candidates talking about anything that might specifically affect Philadelphia?
It's a great question, Trinae. I think for sure, Casey is a big supporter of organized labor. Philadelphia has a lot of union jobs, even if they're not always the sort of like steel and building jobs that people always talk about when they think about Pennsylvania. But we have a ton of manufacturing and a ton of service sector organized labor here. So yeah, I think organized labor is never something to discount. In terms of Philly, I mean, crime has been a through line of any race that you hear about in probably any part of the country, but in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia gets a lot of attention for crime. And so for sure, that's something that's come up. Yeah, those are some of the big ones.
I think Casey's play would be the Philadelphia suburbs. And it's a fascinating dynamic to watch when considering the history of the Casey family. So on the front of the suburbs, like recent cycles and Democrat success on that front in those cycles, he's going for the reproductive rights argument that he has positioned himself as in opposition to what happened with Roe being overturned. But the grand historical irony, of course, that is that the overturning of Roe in the Dobbs case would not have been possible without his father, which his father with Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the 1992 Supreme Court case, I mean, that was addressed in the Dobbs case as well. And his father was the defining figure of the pro-life movement in the Democratic Party until his death. And Casey himself, when he first ran in 2006, ran on a position of abortion that was indistinguishable from that held by his father. So it's a fascinating transformation to watch because Casey's base has changed. He's from an area of the state, Scranton, that played an outsized role in the national pro-life movement. But that region itself is turning red. And Casey is now looking for a bounty of votes among the suburban voters around greater Philadelphia, but also Harrisburg and Western Pennsylvania. And it's that issue that he's turning to, as Democrats have in recent cycles.
I'm, again, thinking about specific Philly issues that might be playing out here. So, we do have an opioid problem here in the city. Obviously, McCormick criticizes Democrats for letting fentanyl in on the southern border. And that's pretty much what Trump is saying about Democrats, right?
It has come up a bunch, and it's come up in a lot of races. McCormick, like Donald Trump, has really been blaming fentanyl getting into cities and towns and being used by tons and tons of Americans on border policies. So again, this sort of marrying of two issues, the opioid crisis and immigration. And I will say, it's not necessary. It's not simple, but also it's not technically accurate that immigrants are bringing in fentanyl. Primarily synthetic opioids enter the U.S. through legal ports of entry. So just a note on that.
But it should be noted, too, I mean, even going back to 2012, the U.S. Justice Department, when they studied Pennsylvania, it really was considered the crossroads for the opioid or the fentanyl heroin drug trade between New York City, the Dominican Republic, and eastern Pennsylvania, that this was the crossroads for the heroin cartel. And that is a deep concern that has a legacy in so many struggling cities across eastern Pennsylvania.
Let's hear from McCormick on this at the debate.
Senator Casey is rich with his strength on the border when he's time and again voted against the measures that are necessary to get our border secure. He said very clearly when President Trump was president, we don't need a wall for border security. The fentanyl crisis, I sat with 4 fentanyl families very recently in my home in Pittsburgh. It's a tragic crisis. It's gotten out of control under Senator Casey. And this is something that we need leadership to go across the border and take on those cartels. Senator Casey showed none of that leadership. He showed up now very recently as a strong advocate for the border. He hasn't even been there.
Thank you. This week, Trump was at a rally in Pennsylvania and he invited McCormick on stage, sort of. This is what happened.
David, I know you just spoke. Just come here, say like for 2 seconds, because nobody wants to hear you right now. Just come up. But we got to get this guy in office. Come on, guys.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, it all comes down to the Keystone State, right here.
They're a little bit of a political odd couple. They're very different in terms of, I think, their approach, how they want to be perceived. McCormick, I think, is in the more traditional mold of a politician. He's not as bombastic as Trump. And that's just me talking in generalities. But I would say more specifically, Trump was initially hesitant to endorse McCormick in this bid for U.S. Senate. But since, McCormick became the nominee, since Trump became the decisive nominee, they've backed each other. McCormick has appeared just in support of Trump at various events. So, whatever their past or whatever their personal relationship is, they're now in the traditional, candidate for U.S. Senate president way, supporting each other.
Katie, what are each of these candidates like on the stump or with voters? You wrote Casey once said he was compared to oatmeal. Like, I'm trying to figure out what that means. Does that mean like nutritious or something consistent but boring?
I think boring was the big takeaway. Yeah.
Okay.
Bob Casey, if you've ever seen him speak, I'm sure some of our listeners have. He's a pretty soft-spoken guy. And he tends to go pretty deep in like his speeches on like policy stuff. Like I've heard him talk about healthcare and he gets very granular. But yeah, he's been accused of being boring in the past. And I think he knows that.
All right. This tight Senate race in Pennsylvania has been mostly overshadowed by the fact that most people seem to think we're in the most important state in the country when it comes to deciding the presidential race. When Trump won Pennsylvania in 2016, he won the White House. When Biden won Pennsylvania in 2020 by just 44,000 votes, he won the White House. So what's the state of things at this moment, Charles, when it comes to Harris versus Trump?
Well, it's so dramatically neck and neck. I mean, and it would be fatuous for anyone to prognosticate how this is going to pan out. And it's because the state itself has changed so much just in the Trump era that since 2016, suburban areas of the state have grown that much more since that first election when Trump won. And then those suburbs in the state that in some cases rewarded Trump punished him in 20 and have gone ever more democratic since then. But conversely, of course, you have working class regions in the state and including around Philadelphia. I mean, just pockets that are shifting red and that could apply to lower Bucks, areas of Delaware County. And in this margins fight, when you have a working class voters who appear to be dramatically shifting to Trump versus suburban voters, I mean, that's where this will be decided. Places like the suburbs of Harrisburg versus just enough voters in Northeast Philadelphia who will turn out for Trump.
All right. So, Katie, are the same dynamics that are at play in the Senate race as in the presidential race in terms of demographics? Like Harris needs to get Black voters out in Philly and Pittsburgh while Trump has to get the white Catholics in Scranton. Is it the same dynamics in the Senate race, though?
It's a little bit different, and I think it always will be. I've been talking to a bunch of voters who, many of whom are actually undecided, which is like sort of a unicorn voter to find in most years, but I found more of them this year. And one of the things that I keep hearing is, there are Republicans or people who really like prefer the Republican Party who are sort of like happily voting for McCormick because they're like, yeah, that guy's a regular Republican, but have a little bit more trouble getting on board with Trump just because he is different. Trump is more divisive. There are people who really care about Trump in a way that is positive. They really want to vote for him. And then there are other people who would happily vote for most Republicans who are nervous about voting for somebody like Trump because they think he's not trustworthy or they think he's like too focused on the 2020 election, not on the future. So those are just things that I've heard from specific voters. So I would say, like, as far as there is a different dynamic, look, I mean, the top of the ticket always has coattails that drag along other races. They're always going to be related in many very large ways. But the candidates are not the same. And so we have seen ticket splitting in recent years in Pennsylvania. We saw, for instance, in 2020, Governor Shapiro won by a much greater margin than John Fetterman won by in the U.S. Senate race. So it's not like things are always in lockstep. So I would, roughly anticipate there to be different margins in the U.S. Senate race than in the presidential race. I do think it depends on turnout. I think turnout's huge. So, for instance, in a place like Philadelphia, where there are a ton of Democratic votes, turnout hasn't always been awesome, especially in the last couple of years. So if Philadelphians are inspired to turn out, that's going to be a big difference maker. If they're not, that also will be. So things like that, I think, the races aren't going to have the exact same outcome. They are going to be related outcomes.
And on that note, I mean, it applies to demography. So, for example, I mean, the state has changed more in the past, let's say, 18, 20 years. Casey was first elected to Senate in 2006 than it had in the preceding 20 years. And that applies to so many cities that now have Latino majority populations. How many of those Latino voters, if they are voting, are going to turn out for Republicans and vote for McCormick, for example? McCormick has campaigned aggressively in those areas of the state, and this race will test the turnout among Latino voters, working class voters in those Latino communities who may turn out for the Republican Party. Likewise, in suburbs, there are 430,000 Jewish voters in Pennsylvania. There are Jewish residents in Pennsylvania. And in terms of that turnout, I'm talking to a number of Jewish Democrats around Pittsburgh, around Philadelphia, who are deeply concerned about the Democratic Party's far left fringe and intend on voting for McCormick because of their concerns about Casey. And that demography as well, it will be interesting to see the turnout for Republicans on that front.
We'll be back with more after the break.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During Cybersecurity Awareness Month, LifeLock wants to give you helpful tips to protect your identity. Using multi-factor authentication can be a line of defense to help protect your personal information, like getting a text with a security code. But LifeLock offers comprehensive protection against identity theft. Protect your identity today with a 30-day free trial at lifelock.com/podcast.
I was driving on City Avenue here in the city, and there's a house that looks like they were celebrating a high school senior's graduation, but instead of, a student, a child, it was really Kamala Harris's name spelled in big letters on their lawn. And then I've seen some Trump billboards out there, but it doesn't seem like as much of a visual representation as it was in compared to the Philadelphia mayoral race, where there was lawn signs with everyone's name all over the place. But what we do see is the bombardment of commercials on TV and YouTube, even on the radio. I read a piece in the New York Times this week that reported that both Harris and Trump campaigns and their allies are spending $350 million just on TV ads. So I'm curious, what's been your least favorite ad that you have seen or heard in this election cycle?
Oh, well, as a political reporter, I love and hate all ads equally. No, I mean, listen, it's inescapable, right? I think my least favorite thing is just the scale and the number of them. Right. I will say, now that the Phillies have lost and are out of the World Series.
Oh, I don't want to talk about
it. RIP, horrible game. But now I won't be watching sports quite as much for a little while.
Well, we got the Eagles.
I'll see fewer of them. Yeah, exactly. Now I get to suffer with the Eagles. I'm taking a week off. So that's my take.
Gotcha. How about for you, Charles?
Well, I mean, it's astonishing. We're this is a state that is just shattering records on election spending. It's something close to $1 billion that has flooded into the state between TV, radio, digital ads, heading into election day. So, as Katie noted, it is inescapable. In 2018, outside groups spent less than $2 million in the Senate race between Casey and Lou Barletta. This year, it's approaching about $250 million. So that gives a sense of all the money just flooding in and how important this state is.
And I didn't mention the darn text messages, too.
Oh, my gosh. They are ever present.
I don't know what I hear more cheering for the teams or more like, another political campaign ad.
Yeah.
All right, Charles, Katie, I appreciate your reporting, and get some rest because it's going to be a long 3.5 weeks until election. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you.
It's time for the tip of the week, where we share a life hack for living in Philly. Speaking of Election Day, on Tuesday, November 5th, you have until Monday, October 21st to register to vote. To find where your polling place is, check out the State Department website. We'll have a link in the show notes. And if you plan on voting with a mail ballot, you have until Tuesday, October 29th at 5 p.m. to make your request. If you have a tip of the week, we'd love to hear from you too. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Our executive producer is Matt Katz. Our producers are Abby Fritz, Adam Sage, Lizzie Goldsmith, and Selena Say Reynolds. Our Hey Philly newsletter editor is Asha Prihar. And our host is me, Trinae Nuri. Music is by Philly's own Interminable, with additional music from All the Kimonos and James Weldon. If you enjoyed this week of episodes, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Philly. We'll be back Tuesday morning with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend and be safe, y'all. Bye.